Rumi said, "The soul was made to fly, but why even with wings do you still feel like you're falling?" You woke up. You opened your eyes to something greater. You felt that sudden expansion, as if your soul had returned to your body, as if finally everything began to make sense. But then came silence, a strange silence, dense, an emptiness you can't explain. And that's when doubt whispers, "If I woke up, why do I still feel so lost inside?" Maybe no one told you that spiritual awakening doesn't bring immediate relief. It's not a happy ending. It's a brutal beginning, because before flying, the soul needs to free itself from the weights it has learned to carry. Have you ever felt this? A deep feeling of not belonging anywhere anymore, as if you were between worlds, between who you were and who you still don't know how to be? This is not weakness. It's the pain of being in transition. It is the scar of a soul that has begun to remember who it is but still has no words to say. You feel this emptiness because you no longer fit into a life that was built to hide your light. And even with all your effort, it still feels like something inside you is screaming for something the world can't give. This is where many give up. They think they've gone the wrong way, that they've regressed, that they've lost faith. But the truth is, emptiness is not the end. It is the echo of what needs to be left behind. Rumi wrote, "Don't look outside for what can only be cured inside." Maybe you are still looking, trying to fill this hole with answers, with people, with promises of peace that never come. But what if this void is sacred? What if it's not a flaw, but the space where your new truth is being gestated? Maybe what you feel today is not sadness, but the silence of a soul that has stopped pretending. And that's what we're going to talk about today. If this touched you, if you also feel that there is something in you that has awakened but has not yet found peace, stay with me until the end, because what comes next, it may not be what you expected to hear, but it may be exactly what your soul needed to remember. Comment here, "I feel this emptiness, but I choose to walk through it." Because now, let's find out why awakening can hurt so much. And why is that? It's a sign that you're closer to yourself than ever before. Have you ever noticed how no one prepares you for the emptiness that comes after waking up? Everyone talks about light, peace, elevated soul, but almost no one talks about this silent abyss that opens up within you, just when you begin to see with the eyes of your soul. It's as if you've gone upstairs, but everything around you is still in darkness. You feel more, understand more, perceive more, but at the same time he feels more alone, more exposed, more lost. Maybe you're feeling this right now. A tiredness that isn't physical, a loneliness that isn't a lack of people around, but an absence of oneself, as if something had been ripped out, and you couldn't say what. This is the invisible problem, that subtle pain that no one sees, but that accompanies you even in moments of silence. This emptiness is not about the world outside. It's about the echo that remained inside after the illusion fell. And if you don't understand this, you'll feel like you're failing. You'll feel like spirituality didn't work. You'll try to go back to the old way, and it will hurt even more. That's why I need you to stay until the end of this video. It's not just another piece of content. It's an emotional map. It's a conversation with your soul. Every word here was chosen to touch where no one else touches. To remind you of something you may have forgotten, that this emptiness was also sacred. If you've ever felt this way, or are feeling it now, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't sell miracles. We deliver gentle truths, even if they hurt. Now, let's talk about the spiritual root behind all of this, because understanding the origin is the beginning of liberation. You feel like you've evolved, that you've awakened spiritually, but inside, there's a hole that won't close, as if your soul has returned but hasn't yet found a home. Have you ever felt that emptiness after searching for so much light? As if everything you've learned, everything you've read, all the practices you've tried, suddenly can't fill you anymore. It's as if the light you've been searching for has finally arrived, but instead of comfort, it brought a strange silence, a silence that doesn't scream, but weighs heavily. This is the kind of pain no one sees. It's not that obvious, blatant sadness. It's not a crisis of tears or despair. It's a silent emptiness, a void you feel especially when you're alone, lying down before bed, or amidst the noise of the world, realizing that nothing there truly represents you anymore. You wake up and know you've changed, But you no longer know who you are. The old you no longer makes sense, and the new you hasn't arrived yet. And that gap between the two is precisely what tears you apart inside. This is the invisible problem, the pain of being between versions of yourself, the feeling of no longer recognizing yourself in the emotional mirror that life reflects. You look within and see echoes of a past that no longer fits, but you also don't clearly see what comes next. This leaves you suspended like a broken bridge between two worlds, a world where you were blind and suffered without knowing, and another where you've begun to see but haven't yet learned to live with this new vision. This is where many people get stuck, because they believe that awakening would bring immediate relief, that it would be like a magic key opening all doors. But it's not. True awakening is brutal. It tears down walls you've spent years building. It exposes wounds you've spent your entire life trying to hide. It tears apart beliefs, breaks patterns, dismantles internal structures, and in its place it leaves silence. A silence that isn't absence. It's space. Space for something new to be born. But before that, you have to endure this emptiness. And herein lies the challenge, learning to live with this hole inside, without trying to fill it with distractions, with people, with ready-made answers. Because the void isn't asking to be filled. It's asking to be heard. It's saying, stop running away. Sit here with me, look inside. But you've been conditioned to run, to search outside, to think that discomfort is a mistake, when in fact it's the sign that your soul has begun to awaken, but still needs you to navigate the process. Perhaps right now you're feeling like no one around you understands you, that you speak and no one listens, that you feel and no one accepts you. This creates a profound weariness, as if life has lost its color, even after you've discovered the light. And this is very common among those who have awakened, because when you emerge from unconsciousness, the world around you remains the same, only you have changed. And this isolates you, leaves you marginalized, as if you were speaking a new language and everyone still spoke the old language of fear, haste, and performance. You start to question everything. The relationships that once felt right now seem superficial. The places that once welcomed you now feel overwhelming. The conversations that once distracted you now tire you. You find yourself in a cycle of increasing disconnection, not out of arrogance, but out of perception. You see the hidden pain in people. You see the lies disguised as routine. You see the repetitive patterns that once seemed normal. And it hurts, because you can no longer pretend. You can no longer go back to sleep. It's at this point that many awakened souls are tempted to give up, not on the process, but on themselves. Because they think they're going crazy, lost, broken, when in fact they're just crossing the sacred desert. Rumi said, "Do not despair when the path seems empty. Emptiness is the beginning of creation." But the ego hates emptiness. It wants to fill, resolve, conclude. It wants answers. And the soul wants silence. It wants time. It wants depth. You feel like you've already understood a lot, but at the same time, you feel like you're lost, as if floating between certainties that have fallen and truths that have yet to arrive. This is awakening, and no one warned you it would come like this. Silent, cutting, transformative. It's not a spectacle. It's a silent farewell to who you were, and mourning this old self, however painful, is necessary, because only after this mourning happens do you truly begin to live from your soul. And perhaps at this very moment as you listen to me, you're trying to understand why this emptiness hurts so much, why even after everything, so many steps, so much surrender, it's still there, silently accompanying you. And I want to tell you something. You're not alone. You never were. You simply disconnected from yourself for too long. And now, your soul is asking for presence, real presence. No masks, no rush, no promises of a quick cure. Now I want you to write here in the comments if this makes sense to you. I am in the void, but I am ready to listen to what he wants to reveal to me. This isn't just a comment. It's a statement, a surrender, a permission for something to begin moving within you. Emptiness is not a sign of failure, no matter how much everything inside you screams otherwise, no matter how heavy your chest feels when you lie down at night, as if carrying the whole world inside. This silence isn't there to punish you. It didn't come to test you. It's the inevitable consequence of something much greater happening within you, because in truth, This emptiness is a spiritual milestone. It shows that the ego has lost control, and that the soul, little by little, begins to rise from oblivion. Rumi said, "You were born with wings. Why do you prefer to crawl?" This seemingly simple question is one of the most profound on the journey of awakening. Because the truth is, you spent your entire life trying to mold yourself, to please, to fit in. You made yourself small to fit into places that were never yours. You created versions of yourself to be accepted by people who didn't even know who you were. And with each adaptation, a piece of you fell silent. Your soul no longer screamed. It just watched, waited, until one day you got tired. Something inside you broke, and in that rupture, awakening was born. But awakening is like being born again, and being born hurts. The old self begins to die, but the new self hasn't learned to walk yet. This gap between one and the other is what you feel as emptiness. Only it's not a hole, it's a space, an open field where the soul begins to reconstruct the truth. And this space needs time. It needs silence. It needs permission. Because the soul is like a secret garden. It only blooms when it's not forced. And the ego, that's what gets desperate. It wants to label, understand, react. It says, you need to be okay. You need to appear happy. You need to make sense of all this. But the soul whispers something else. It says, breathe. You don't need to go back to who you were. You just need to stop running from who you're becoming. The ego hates not having control. And that's why you feel this anxiety disguised as emptiness. Because what's crumbling inside you isn't your essence. It's the illusion you believed yourself to be. The spiritual root of this emptiness is the prolonged disconnection between you and your own truth. You've lived so long disconnected from your soul, your sensitivity, your intuition, that now, upon reconnecting, everything feels strange, even frightening. But this is natural. It's like when you meet someone again after years and still don't know exactly how to behave. The soul needs intimacy, and this intimacy was broken by years of emotional denial, by traumas that taught you to hide your feelings, by relationships that made you believe that feeling too much was a weakness. And now, that soul that had lain dormant for so long has begun to awaken, but the body is still accustomed to pain, to haste, to survival. And this transition between automatic and conscious, between the wounded ego and the present soul, is painful. It's an internal birth, a slow birth. And in this process, emptiness is the interval between the old pain and the new consciousness. Many people think they're depressed, that they're regressing, that they've lost faith. But in reality, what's happening is that the old ground has disappeared and the new is still being built. Hence the feeling of falling, of absence, of disorientation. But this is part of the journey. It's the soil being cleared before receiving new roots. And you need to trust, because all true healing involves the discomfort of truth. Rumi wrote, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And maybe that's what's happening to you right now. It's not punishment. It's opening. You're not broken. You're being molded. The soul doesn't break out of vanity. It breaks so that light can enter, so that what was hidden beneath the pain can finally emerge. And the deepest spiritual pain is often this, realizing that what you lost was never yours. And who you truly are, you still don't know. This recognition is frightening, but it's also the beginning of freedom. Because only those who have the courage to let go of the emotional lie that has sustained their identity for so long can free themselves. You don't feel this emptiness because you failed. You feel this emptiness because you're awakening. And this, paradoxical as it may seem, is a blessing. It's a reminder that you are alive, present, aware, even if you don't yet know what to do with it all. Even if you still feel like you're floating between worlds. True awakening isn't made of certainties. It's made of ruptures, of silences, of surrender. And perhaps that's the greatest invitation of this moment, to stop trying to fill the void and start listening to what it wants to say. Emptiness is a language, a silent prayer, a pause between two versions of yourself. And the more you resist, the heavier it weighs. But when you surrender, it begins to transform. Now that you're beginning to understand what's behind this subtle, silent pain, I invite you to reflect with me next, because there's something even deeper behind this emptiness. A key, a hidden principle that no one has taught you. And when you understand this, perhaps for the first time you'll feel that something within you has begun to align. that your soul is finally returning home. If this spoke to your soul, if you felt that this content describes what you are experiencing inside, comment here. I am the soul reborn from silence. This could be the exact moment your transformation begins to take shape, and I want to stay with you. Let's go together because there's still so much to reveal. No one told you that awakening also hurts, and that's perhaps the cruelest part. Not the pain itself, but the loneliness of feeling it without understanding that it's part of the journey. Because when you began to awaken, they promised you light. They promised you peace, expansion, elevation. But no one prepared you for the part where everything hidden would come to light. No one warned you that the light you so desperately sought also illuminates the shadows. And that healing before being sweet is brutal. What you're experiencing now, this feeling of emptiness, of disconnection, of being suspended between what no longer exists and what hasn't yet arrived, this isn't a mistake. This is part of the alchemy. Spiritual light doesn't come to please you. It comes to purify you. And purification isn't pretty. It scrapes, cleans, reveals. The dust that was hidden beneath the emotional rugs you swept for years is now exposed. And that's what hurts. It's not the awakening that hurts. It's everything you need to let go of to stay awake. The soul, unlike the ego, doesn't seek comfort. It seeks truth. And truth hurts when you've spent your entire life trying to protect yourself from it. Therefore, at this point in your journey, emptiness isn't absence. It's space. Space being created within you so something new can inhabit. But the new, contrary to what many say, doesn't come with a bang. It doesn't slam the door. It arrives slowly, like a silent seed that needs clean soil to sprout. And the ground in this case is your heart. A heart that has been hurt, betrayed, silenced. A heart that has adapted to pain like someone accustomed to darkness. And now that the light has arrived, it doesn't quite know what to do. That's why you feel this discomfort, because your emotional system is being recalibrated. It's slowly learning to truly feel, and not just react, survive, endure. The hidden key to the spiritual process isn't understanding everything. It's accepting what can't be explained, allowing yourself to experience what has no name. Because there are times when the soul falls silent, not out of weakness but out of maturity. Because it understands that certain transformations only occur when control is lost. And that's exactly what emptiness demands. Surrender. Not passivity, but active surrender. A kind of trust that says, I don't understand, but I continue. Accepting the void is honoring the sacred that is still being born within you. Because the new you will not be an improved version of the old. It will be another way of existing. A lighter, deeper, quieter way. And that's why so much is falling apart. Because your old emotional structure no longer accommodates the expanding soul. Old pains, relationship patterns, unconscious repetitions. All of this is being dissolved so that a new consciousness can emerge. Rumi said, don't seek love. Just remove everything that blocks it from arriving. That's the key. Emptiness isn't something that needs to be filled. It's something that needs to be understood. Because within it, there's wisdom. There's healing. There's a kind of love that isn't emotion, but presence. When you stop fighting the emptiness and start listening to it, something magical happens. You realize it's always been there, not as punishment, but as guidance. The soul screams in silence, and often this scream manifests as that hole you feel in your chest. But this hole is the very place where the light enters, as Rumi said. And the light that enters doesn't enter to shine. It enters to guide, to make you see parts of yourself that were forgotten. And yes, it's uncomfortable, because every inner revelation comes with a renunciation. You need to let go of what was emotionally safe to live what is true spiritually. And in this process, the hardest part isn't what comes next. It's what needs to be left behind. You need to let go of the old versions of yourself that were created out of fear, a need for acceptance and unhealed trauma. You need to say goodbye to the emotional identity you built to survive, and make room for the soul that wants to live, to truly live, deeply, quietly, meaningfully. The key is surrender, but not just any surrender, not the sad resignation of someone who gives up, but the conscious surrender of someone who understands that control is an illusion, of someone who learns to trust the darkness of the spiritual womb where the new self is being gestated. Healing doesn't happen on the surface. It happens in that subtle place where you feel everything and at the same time, it seems like nothing is happening. Because the invisible works in silence. And your job now is to allow this emptiness to teach you, allow it to cleanse, allow it to show you what you're still trying to hold on to unnecessarily. Because every pain that persists reveals a part of you that still resists letting go. And when you let go, when you finally stop trying to save yourself from the pain and begin to move through it, something changes. Something is reborn. Because what hurts you isn't the end, it's the fight against the end. The soul doesn't suffer from what passes. It suffers from what you insist on holding on to. So perhaps now is the time to stop. Stop searching for formulas, answers, promises, and start listening. Listening with your soul, listening with your body, listening with that inner silence you've always avoided. Because it's in this silence that the key lies. The key to a new way of being, a more whole way, a truer way, a more yours. If this message spoke to you, write here in the comments. I allow the silence to reveal my new form. This could be the symbolic gesture that transforms the emptiness that weighs you down into a space that prepares you. Maybe you left a relationship. One that for a long time you believed was the right place for your heart. Maybe it was a love that hurt more than it healed. A bond built on need, fear of abandonment, on that distorted idea that it was better to have someone, anyone, than to face oneself in the mirror. Maybe you gave too much of yourself, nullified yourself, molded yourself, trying to fit into spaces that didn't recognize your soul. And when you finally decided to leave, thinking that freeing yourself would be easier, what you found was silence. Or maybe it was the work, the routine, the life built on expectations that weren't yours. You did what was expected. You followed the path they said was right. You achieved goals, accumulated responsibilities, strived to be efficient, productive, and recognized. But inside, something screamed, a void that no achievement could fill. And when you decided to walk away or were driven away by a twist in life, you believed freedom would bring peace. But it brought a new kind of silence, a disconcerting silence, as if, without that identity, you no longer knew who you were. This is where many get confused, because we've been taught to associate liberation with immediate relief, as if leaving something toxic was enough to heal the pain. But no one taught us that often it's precisely after the breakup that the soul begins to scream loudest. Because while you were trapped, in a way, there was still a structure, fragile, painful, but familiar. When you break up, you lose your footing, and it's in this space between the old that's gone and the new that hasn't yet been born that silence sets in. And this silence can be read as sadness, as emptiness, as a mistake. But it's none of these. It's reconstruction. It's the soul's time to reorganize itself. Before, you were full of wounds, of emotional armor, of characters who needed to keep up appearances. Now you're empty, not of yourself, but of the illusions that sustained the old version of yourself. And this is frightening because the ego doesn't know how to exist without defined roles. But the soul flourishes in the undefined. This process, though it may seem lonely, is universal. Many people experience this kind of transition without anyone to share it with, because from the outside everything seems calm, but inside the world is falling apart. And that's when you need to understand, what's falling apart isn't your life. It's the emotional lie you've been conditioned to call life. It's the character, the pattern, the repetitive cycle. The soul is trying to rebuild, but to do so, it must first demolish what isn't true. Maybe you're experiencing exactly this right now. An existential pause where everything seems at a standstill, but in reality it's just the invisible movement of healing. The soul works in the dark, and often this silence you feel is the sound of reconstruction. But since you were never taught to trust the invisible, you try to fill it, to retreat, to seek distractions. But none of this works, because your consciousness has already expanded. You no longer fit into what hurt you. And here comes the most delicate point, the moment you try to return to the relationship, to the pattern, to your old self, just because the emptiness is scary, just because the new doesn't yet have form, but it can't fit where you've already freed yourself. The pain of returning is greater than the pain of moving on. And moving on at this moment isn't about running. It's about staying. It's about accepting this silence as part of the journey. It's about understanding that rebuilding the soul doesn't happen in a hurry. It happens with presence. Rumi wrote, "When the soul lies down on that grass, the world is too full to speak. Ideas, language, even the sentence each of us is, no longer has meaning. That grass is the moment you are in now, a space between the old and the new, a place where words lose power but the inner truth begins to echo. It's confusing, it's subtle, but it's deeply real. Reconstruction has no manual. Each soul has its own time, its own pain, its own silence. But there's one thing in common. This entire process is a call to return to the essence, not an idealized, perfect essence, but a real human essence that accepts its own scars as part of its history. And when you begin to see this emptiness not as a failure but as fertility, something begins to change. You don't rush. You respect yourself. You listen. You become the soil where a new version can finally be born. And even if you don't yet know what this new version will be like, that's okay, because it won't come ready-made. It will be built in silence, in daily rituals of self-acceptance, in small decisions to not return to what hurt you, in gentle choices to listen to yourself, even when everything around you seems to be begging you to be silent. And in this process, you'll realize that the emptiness that once frightened you is now your temple. If what you're experiencing doesn't yet have a name, if no one around you seems to understand what you're feeling, know that you're not alone. This journey is silent, but it's not lonely. Others are also being reborn in silence. Others are also traversing the same field of shadows and light. And when you allow yourself to remain in this emptiness with honesty, you begin to feel something new. Presence. Not the presence of others, but your own. For the first time, perhaps, you begin to be with yourself without fear. If this part spoke to what you live in silence, comment here. I honor the invisible reconstruction that is being born within me. Maybe this is more than a sentence. Maybe it's the moment your soul begins to recognize itself in the words. And this recognition is the beginning of your new story. You are not lost. Despite the feeling of confusion, despite the weight on your shoulders, despite the days when you feel disconnected even from yourself, you are not lost. What is happening to you is not a lack of direction, it is emptiness. And this emptiness, however disconcerting, is sacred. Because before you can find yourself, you need to strip yourself bare. You need to shed the layers you built to survive. You need to let go of everything that no longer speaks to your soul. The ego believes that to be empty is to be lost, but the soul knows. The soul recognizes the process. It understands that silence is fertile, that space is fertile, that nothingness is not absence, it is gestation. The soul knows that it takes time for the new truth to emerge. And perhaps right now, you are precisely in that gap between who you were and who you are about to become. This gap is uncomfortable because it has no structure, it has no name, it has no formulas. This is where many people back down. They feel the call, they even begin to awaken. But when the ground disappears, fear takes over. And the fear of emptiness is one of the oldest fears of the human soul. It activates all the unconscious memories of abandonment, rejection, and not belonging. The void touches places you thought you had already healed. But what it actually does is show you what still needs to be embraced. You feel directionless, but that's precisely because your old direction no longer serves you. You feel like no one understands you, but that's because you've now begun to see with the eyes of your soul, and many around you still live with the eyes of survival. You feel far from everything, but in reality, you're closer to yourself than ever. You just don't recognize yourself yet. Rumi wrote, "Don't settle for stories. Awaken your own legend." This phrase isn't just beautiful, it's a calling, because many people live repeating stories that aren't theirs. Stories inherited, imposed, programmed. Stories of emotional failure disguised as stability. Stories where love is control, where success is exhaustion, where silence is seen as a threat. And spiritual awakening calls you to step out of these narratives, to write a new story, your own. And writing your own legend is an act of courage, because it requires you to question everything you've believed. It requires you to look within honestly. It requires you to accept not knowing, because only those who accept not knowing are capable of making room for what is new. And that's what this void represents. The portal, the point where repetition ends and creation begins. The place where you stop living for others and start living with yourself. The portal is not visible, It has no signs, no map, no GPS. It is felt. It manifests itself when, in the midst of silence, you decide not to run away. When even without understanding, you choose to stay. When faced with the absence of answers, you become presence. This is the turning point. It is not an external event. It is an internal movement. A place where you begin to walk with your soul, even without seeing the ground. And along the way, you begin to realize that the pain that seemed to destroy you is now a passage. That the emptiness that seemed like the end is now a beginning. That the silence that seemed like abandonment is now listening to your deepest truth, the one buried by so many years of emotional denial, adaptation, and fear. And as this listening deepens, you realize something. It's not that the world has become more difficult, it's that you've become more sensitive. And this sensitivity, contrary to what they say, is not weakness. It's strength, it's clarity, it's awareness. Sensitivity is what allows you to feel what truly matters. It's what connects you with what's true. It's what separates noise from soul. And at that point, you begin to make different choices. Choices that don't please everyone, but that make sense to you. Choices that don't follow the world's logic, but follow the truth of your soul. This is the shift in consciousness. A silent point where you stop being guided by fear and start being guided by presence. Where you stop reacting and start listening. Where you no longer seek ready-made answers, you seek connection. Connection with what cannot be said but can be felt. And in this feeling, your life begins, little by little, to realign itself. Not with what the world expects of you, but with what you truly came to live. And yes, there will be times when you'll doubt. You'll feel strange. You'll want to return to familiar zones. But remember, don't run away. Because this void is the portal. And crossing it isn't a one-day task. It's an ongoing process of birth. A process where pain isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that something is finally revealing itself. What hurts isn't the void. What hurts is the resistance to it. If something inside you felt that this moment is exactly where you are now, write here in the comments, "I cross the void because I trust my new truth." Perhaps this phrase is the beginning of a silent pact with your soul. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized the silent truth of these words. And I want to thank you, not for me, but for choosing to stay, even when the content didn't bring easy answers, but rather profound questions. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a continuation of this spiritual journey. Each word is designed to heal, awaken, and accompany your soul in moments when the world doesn't know what to say. Leave your like too. This simple gesture helps spread this message to others who are feeling the same emptiness, but don't yet know how to name it. And now, watch the next video that's appearing on the screen. It's a continuation of what you started here. Because the soul's journey never ends, it only deepens. Let's go together always.